Welcome, everyone, to the second annual SFFCon creative track on realistic design. I'm C.W. Lamb, and I'd like everybody to introduce themselves. Gerald?
Hi, Gerald M. Kilby. Science fiction writer. No surprise there. I have two series. One is Colony Mars, kind of hard. I write hard sci-fi, so it has to be based pretty much on the real deal. So I have a Colony Mars series, and then I have a series called The Belt, which is kind of the solar system, so out around the asteroid belt. So that's me.
Alan?
Hi, I'm Alan Stroud, university lecturer and science fiction writer. Apparently, I write hard science fiction. That's what I was told when people started reviewing Fearless. Otherwise, I'm generally someone who makes lots of stuff, has a highly inquiring mind, but is really, really rubbish as a scientist.
Lisa? Lisa, you're
muted.
How's that? Is that better?
Much better, yeah.
I write as L.L. Richmond. I have 15 books that have been published in 2 universes and across 4 series. I write the Biogenesis universe, and I also have 2 series in the Aeon 14 universe.
Rick?
I'm Rick Partlow. I write military science fiction and space opera. I have 40 plus books in 11 series, and latest one is the Holy War series.
SJ?
And I'm S.J. Schauer. I'm the author-creator of the Spiral War Saga series of books, which Dawnrunner has recently acquired and will be doing a relaunch on in the fall.
Congratulations. I'm Charlie C.W. Lamb. I write science fiction, fantasy, and other odd paranormal type stuff. I have 13 books, I think, in print right now as well, working on number 14. So today's track is realistic design. As described, science fiction and fantasy lets imagination run wild, but there still needs to be a measure of internal consistency and plausibility with ships, weapons, equipment, etc. This panel will discuss about how we create such designs to enhance our stories. Anybody want to jump on that straight away?
Ooh,
well, we have brave. 3. We have from the left to the right. We've got 3 engineers here, and
an English major,
and a PhD.
Yes.
And so a lot of people who say how, and I've got the radiation physics end where I say why.
I mean, I could probably take a stab in terms of sort of critiquing writing and giving a kind of landscape start, which might kind of help a little bit. In that, certainly from things that I've read in the last few years, where I'm writing and reviewing quite a lot of stuff. I've reviewed since probably about 2014. And for some reason, I now get a review request pretty much every 48 hours, which is it's quite hard to keep on. Well, there's no chance of me keeping on top of. But the thing that certainly I've noted as a prevalent thing in the last few years in science fiction is for there to be an exploration of what is close to reality. And what is almost plausible. So taking existing science knowledge, and stepping just that little bit ahead of it.
Extrapolation.
Yeah, exactly. And finding a sort of a plateau that feels almost within people's lifetimes in terms of the reader. Or you can go the other way, and you can go absolutely into goop and soup. The kind of or bioorganic tech that is so far advanced that we kind of don't recognize it, and miniaturized tech that is so far advanced that we don't recognize it. So and those two things can be interchangeable, within what they are, and within that you're pretty much touching on Clarke's law, at that point, because what you're doing is essentially saying, well, the technology is so far
indistinguishable
away
from magic.
Yeah, I was going to say it. It's okay. It's all right. It was coming. So you're that far forward that there isn't a distinguishment in terms of how things work, and there also isn't a distinguishment in terms of what you can do in your text, in terms of what's there. So I noticed those two areas, and I think most of us giving the introductions kind of fit in the first one and don't necessarily extemporize towards the second one, but maybe we do. It's worth kind of exploring.
Firmly in the second one.
No, I think in terms of realistic design, and one of the first things you have to consider is the respect for science. That your audience now is, even if they are not as learned on the subject, they have such an access to information now that when you throw a scientific term out there, or you throw a physics term out there, or a chemistry term out there, it's not hard for them to sit there and go, oh yeah, that's actually correct, or no, that's complete and utter nonsense. So knowing your stuff and keeping it internally consistent as well is a lot more important now than maybe it was 40 years ago, when we didn't have the access to the information that we once did.
I think that depends on the genre you're writing in, because like if you're writing hard science fiction or more near future type of cyber thriller, then that's important. If you're writing, out there futuristic space opera, they aren't really going to care.
It depends upon the contract you have with your reader.
Yeah, exactly. It's what they expect from you.
I always wondered how Jules Verne survived without the internet. I mean, the level of detail or the supposed reality of his futuristic imaginations, you have to believe that there was a serious amount of research at some level to make that continuity happen. I mean, I don't know the history of the man, but
I'd possibly sort of take us in a slightly left field direction to reference two particular writers. One is Hannu Rajanami, who wrote the Quantum Thief trilogy, which is so super future tech that it is, and it's incredibly dense in some of the ways in which the technology is described. It transcends the human condition, allowing human beings to effectively act like gods within the solar system because of the technology that they have. And I can't, if I try and read it in a kind of detailed imagining the scenes, I can't read it. I have to float. I have to kind of not skim, but I have to read it and just let it
absorb,
soak. Yeah, let it sort of. I have to ride the wave rather than specifically visualize, because otherwise I just can't. I can't cope with it.
It's a little more work to read something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other text I would reference here, which I think is very is fascinating, is something like Holy Blood, Holy Grail. If you've not read Holy Blood, Holy Grail, it's a history book, supposedly, that Dan Brown's work is based on. So it is the history book that three historians went to the Library of Paris and were basically some fraudster, some convicted fraudster from France, pulled a fast one on them and convinced them that all of this stuff about the Templars and everything else was real. And it's written in such a style, because they are professional historians, it's written in such a style as it feels incredibly plausible. So to
Alan, when I read that book, I knew nothing about the research behind debunking that, and I still never once bought any part of what he was selling. I rolled my eyes through that whole book at the so-called history.
I believed it. I was really, wow. How come we're not? And everything is battered.
Yeah, I read that book. I read that book back when it came out, well, yonks ago. But I do think we're sort of alluding to two different themes in science fiction, popular themes in science fiction. So there's the hard science fiction popular theme, and the question would be, why is that popular? And it calls back to what you're talking about, Jules Verne, where Jules Verne was Victorian. There was a great, burning desire at the time for technology. Technology was new. It was the Industrial Revolution. People just were so fascinated by it. And where can you take steam engine technology? That's kind of where Jules Verne comes from. And similarly with hard sci-fi, I think at the moment, it is this desire, I suppose, within people at the moment who see Starship and Blue Origin and the various NASA missions and ESA missions and Chinese missions and so on, and that space is exploding. And so, where can we go with this technology? What is actually possible? So that is one section of science fiction that takes that type of engineering and
pop culture is kind of influencing
and then the second sort of style of science fiction is basically character driven in a very future world that is beyond anything we could possibly imagine technically. Okay, and those sort of stories are centered around really societies and civilizations and characters and how they interact with each other, and that is the sort of science fiction that can strip you of everything that you know and all your biases and present you with a civilization in conflict, okay,
Jerry,
that reflects our own civilization. Is that
Jerry, would you say
back in highbrow for
no. Jerry, would you say that second one in that situation, then realistic spaceship designs, really they're window dressing they're secondary?
Yeah, it's A to B. I'm going to get from A to B by thought, it doesn't matter, make it up. Doesn't really matter. But the first one really is about realistic spaceship design, and that has its hooks in the now, in the present.
Just before we go a bit in that, towards too much of that, I just want to just finish the point that I was making, which was the kind of mythic construct, the false. I think it does demonstrably prove that actually, despite the fact that Rick didn't believe it at all, that there are readers out there who will follow you, who will basically go. I was kind of countering SJ's point in terms of saying, we need to be real, and actually sometimes there are writers out there who can kind of dress it up and get away with it by using a mode of address like a historian's mode of address.
But I think science fiction by definition really has two schools to it. There's a subdivision. There's multiple divisions in science fiction, but in terms of spaceship and space, there are only two real kind of cohorts. There's the realistic design, which is what we're talking about here, and then there's all the other stuff that you can
hand waving stuff.
It's the hand waving. I'm waving.
That's the willing suspension of disbelief stuff.
Right.
Well, and this is
I would say there might be a little bit more than that, because
I wouldn't say that.
You run into people. There's any science fiction that has like any kind of star travel, faster than light star travel, either effectively or through a gate or whatever, is going to have something that's unrealistic as far as we know. That we don't have any idea how it would work or if it would work. Mm-hmm. But they won't. But some of those people take that and run with it and just make the ships Star Wars. Nothing real about it at all. And other people,
they're essentially character-driven stories.
But other people, try to keep it as close to what they can, to what current technology says is they can, and make it. I don't want to say realistic, but at least
you're probably right.
Kind of real.
In what you're saying there's a kind of a bit in the middle that is taking something that's theoretical, like say wormholes. That's theoretical. Okay.
See, I wouldn't categorize
which kind of bridges that gap, I suppose.
I wouldn't categorize it in two camps. I'd probably go with Darko Suvin's definition of the novum from 1979, which is the whole idea of what is your science fiction trope that is based on empirical reality. So what part of empirical reality is your trope based on, and how therefore does it kind of inform the new reality that you're putting across within your science fiction. Now, the thing with Suvan's idea is that it relies on, it doesn't necessarily, when it says empirical reality, it doesn't mean scientifically accurate. What it means is there is something within the audience's empirical reality. There's something in their empirical reality that they can relate to in your future that you're putting across.
Alan, is that the genesis of the concept of the one big lie?
It might be. I don't know. I mean, he wrote it in 79. It's massively quoted. It's currently, I mean, I've got a vast amount of sort of research papers that now are kind of discounting it because they're looking at what the fantasy equivalent of this particular device is. You know, and saying that it doesn't have to be based in empirical reality because you do have fantasy devices that do the same thing. But it's like, I mean, there's the icons theory, which is, you know, this idea that there are sort of legacy things like robots. You know, as soon as you put robots in science fiction, it has a set of tropes and baggage and so on and so forth. Or spaceship, you know, what does spaceship mean? And, you know, I mean, that's all. I mean, there's, I mean, it's, I think Suvan was trying to get at this point of creating a device framework rather than a big picture framework, because when you start looking at sort of, oh, all stories work like this, or all things do this, you actually, sometimes you can find yourself trapping yourself within the frame because you start looking at everything and seeing it, how it fits, rather than how it doesn't.
Is it not true in a sense that when we as science fiction writers are designing spaceships in our heads, okay, that we always use something else as a reference? So I presume if you're coming from the military perspective, I don't write military, but if I was coming from the military perspective, then it's kind of the warship perspective. So you have those kind of tropes coming in to the spaceship, and that in a sense is what your readers really want to see in it. Okay, whereas I could take a realistic design and it's fully autonomous. You just sit there and drink martinis and go for a swim in the swimming pool and the ship just gets you there. But that's a pretty realistic design at the same time.
Well, you hit on a point. I had you know, we were all joking. In fact, Alan needs to show his model now as we go through this. But we all designed spaceships or other devices to fit our storylines. And in one case, I was designing a space cruiser, and the cruiser was for offensive purposes, not defensive purposes. So the shape of the ship was triangular in nature, so that it allowed more firepower to be directed to the front rather than to the rear. And to your point, Gerald, in the history of our navies of the world, you'll find
everything is pointy.
Yeah, well, you'll find ships that have more
Pointy
guns in
front,
the front or
fiery
more
end
guns
behind.
in the back, depending on if I'm attacking or if I'm running away.
Yeah.
But
I always want. I mean, I don't write space battles and that sort of or military sci-fi. I don't write that, but I always kind of wondered how, you know, because space is so vast, and you have a ship and it's, you know, 40,000 kilometers away from you. How do you shoot at the thing? I mean, by the time
very carefully,
by the time anything gets there, you're shooting at it.
Well, I think the point there is that
over here a bit.
if you want to write military science fiction, then you have to tailor your technology around that being doable, being possible. Like,
how would it be possible? I mean, I'm actually genuinely interested in this.
Well, I mean, so I wrote a scene.
Okay, I'll answer later.
But
I mean, a long range engagement. You know, if you're talking military sci-fi, I don't want to go back to the two schools of thought thing, but you have, you know, the battleship school of thought, where you are engaging at vast distances with each other with light speed weaponry or extremely high speed weaponry.
Lasers.
So you're having to do. Have extremely powerful weapons that can breach that distance, along with firing computers that can perfectly plot where something's going to be, because let's face it,
everything's in motion.
everything's constantly in motion. But also, if you're firing, say, a physical round, it's gonna keep going till it hits something. Isaac Newton's the biggest badass in the universe.
That's one of the things that I use in a lot of my military science fiction is the reluctance by both sides to use railguns in like any kind of a large scale conflict, because if you're trying to take a system and hold it, those things are going to be going through space and they're going to hit whatever they hit, and you won't be able to control it. But when I was talking about technology, like if you base your unrealistic, faster than light travel on something like the Alcubierre space-time inflation drive, then you have ships that can accelerate to insane speeds very quickly, and 40,000 miles or kilometers are nothing, that they'll just pop right over there. If you have ships that are going through a gate and they're having to slog through real time to whatever planet they're trying to get to, then you're back to how do you hit things that are that far away? And I deal with that a little bit. I mean, people who are shooting railguns, who use that as weapons, they have to do like a bracketing spread, because all the ships that are coming forward are constantly adjusting their course, so nobody can just do a computer projection of where they're going and shoot a railgun right there. They are constantly having to adjust, so you have to try to hit them with an energy weapon, which energy weapons run into the what's the law I'm thinking of, where they
inverse square
law, where they spread out as they get further away. So you have to be pretty close to hit somebody with a shot that can kill them instantly. And if you're hitting them with just like a laser that heats up their hull by a few degrees, well, they can just spin the ship around and disperse that until they can do some countermeasure. So there's a lot of ways to do it.
I did the math one time about light weapons, lasers, and if you've got a ship out by Jupiter and you're at Earth, it still takes a significant amount of time when you light that laser up to
space is
hit
big.
the other piece.
And to fire
it only
a laser
travels at the speed of light.
To fire a laser strong enough to do any damage to something at Jupiter, you have something that's it's not just a laser weapon. You could launch starships with that.
Exactly.
Well, and you have to have some sort of a collimation device in order to, because it will spread as it goes out. So I mean, there are all sorts of problems with weapons.
Well, but then
surely that feeds into ship design then as well.
Yes. Right back into the topic.
Yeah, so the ship itself has to be kind of like this massive power source, this fusion, let's call it.
Well,
fusion is my go-to. When I need energy for anything, I just go straight to fusion. That's, that solves all my problems.
I have two get out of jail cards that I use. One of which is my brother-in-law is a laser safety engineer, so he designs safety protocols for some of the existing lasers that are all around Europe. And he gets sent to all sorts of different places. And some of the ones he's had to design protocols for, they said, well, what's the maximum range of this? And he said, well, it's massive. But the thing is that as soon as anyone opens the door, it turns off. So the safety, if you want me to calculate the maximum safe distance when it's on, you shouldn't be within 3 miles of it. But as soon as anyone opens the door, it turns off. So he basically, can kind of give a bit of a guide sometimes when I go to start thinking about lasers. And then I am very blessed to know an architect of naval engineering who designs battleships for a living. And so Dr. Nick Bradbeer has done several talks over here in the UK at different conventions. And he essentially does a brilliant talk on spaceship design. And I can never remember what it is, whether it's a penguin or a puffin or whatever it is. That rotating ship, the one with the rocket on this end and the rocket on that end. So it continually, it's just a rotating stick. But he does
There's a name for it. I don't know.
I mean, it is a fascinating design, and he does a wonderful talk on what what realistic spaceships might look like. But we've all got to kind of flip a little bit of a suspension of disbelief. And
if we are really talking about realistic spaceships, I mean, this is what we're talking about, then we have to discount all the lasers and the fusion drives and
Fusion drives are very realistic.
Yeah,
no, but I mean,
but right now it's fission.
Well, we don't right now. I mean, I'm talking about realistic.
You could
what could we do now?
You could have an Orion type of drive with fusion reactions. Like it would require a fission bomb to set them off at this point. But I don't think we're that far away from being able to do the Daedalus type of thing where you shoot a laser at and set up a fusion reaction.
And again, when you're talking realistic design, you have to establish what your technology level is. If you're talking modern day tech level, a fusion rocket is not exactly something that we can use. But you have Nervo rockets that can put you to, that are the fission rockets that'll get you there pretty dang quick.
Well, when we say realistic, are we talking about right now or what we will conceivably able to build in the near future? Because I mean, right now we build chemical rockets. If you're near future, then fusion is not unrealistic at all.
Well, I think realistic is really something that the reader can relate to, and at least I'm not looking for supreme. Right, extrapolate. You're not suspending total disbelief. I mean, it's the issue of we're staying out of the magic world. And it's like I designed in one of my stories a rebreather for divers, and literally it took in seawater and generated oxygen and nitrogen for the breather. Can we do that? No. Is it chemically possible? Actually is. I went through all the math again, had to get a friend who got a better grade in chemistry than I did, but there's enough of the base elements in seawater to be able to create breathable gases if you have the right mechanism to break them apart.
Right.
That's realistic. Is it practical? No, but it's relatable.
We have, I mean, currently we have more than, I mean, we've got the fission, it's called, what is it called? The kilowatt reactor using a Stirling engine technology that they actually fired in 2018, and the Draco, which is the new engine that the Space Force is going to be using. That's it's the size of a man. It's a small nuclear reactor. It's the size of a man, and it's going to be used. It uses sodium heat pipes to. And and it's far more to
Be technical. That was highly technical.
I'm all about
the lights the tires, and lights the fires and kicks the tires.
I hate to talk about the physics part about it. The engineering part, I'm just like, okay, it's that black box. It just goes.
Yeah. Well, I was using. We're
not too far away.
I had a book where I decided I was going to use the EM drive. Does anybody remember that?
I used that.
Yeah.
I
resisted the temptation because I just knew at some point, like a year after I wrote it, that they would disprove it.
That's exactly what they did.
Yep.
I was going, this is great. I could use
as an engineer, I saw that thing and I'm like, it's an interesting concept. It ain't gonna work.
God, no.
I just remember all the Dean drives from back in the 70s. Remember that? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always been these crazy,
cold fusion drives. Cold fusion in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still not
there's
convinced that cold fusion there isn't something happening there.
Well, it did. Okay,
this
from a scientific perspective,
Holy Grail.
I was just going to say that.
From a scientific perspective, the word cold doesn't mean the same thing as it does in layman's terms. So cold fusion doesn't necessarily mean.
But in the popular press, it was.
It just means less than.
Literally,
I power a lot of
glass
my
of
robots using LENR, low energy nuclear reactor, which is based on kind of cold fusion.
Don't forget zero.
I'm not discounting it. Maybe maybe I'll be like Jules Verne and go, for God's sake, that's ridiculous.
And then 200 years from now, that Kilby guy, he was man.
Oh yeah, he didn't get it right at all.
He was prescient. Yeah. Well, aside from drives, we have all sorts of other things that we have to consider in realistic design, such as how do we protect the people? We've got galactic cosmic rays. We've got CMEs, coronal mass ejections and flares and all sorts of radiation that we have to shield from. And there was a really interesting article that came out, a study that came out a couple of days ago, where they studied zebrafish of all things, and they exposed them to galactic cosmic rays, or the equivalent of galactic cosmic radiation. These fish go into, and I'm going to say the word wrong, torpor, Torpor.
Yeah, that's right.
Torpor.
Yeah.
And it protects them from that. And so now they're thinking, okay, if we, a chemical drive is going to take us 8 months to get to Mars. This new fusion Draco drive they're thinking now 3 months maybe. But 3 months is still a whole lot of physical damage that can happen to the human body with radiation. So we just put people to sleep.
Hibernation like aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're back on.
Well, there's a couple of. I think there's a couple of solutions that I use for that. One is the one that they actually use, which is water. Big water jacket. So you bring all your water and you basically live in it. You shield the spacecraft. The second one is actually to create your own magnetosphere.
Yes.
Which requires a lot of power.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's theoretically possible. I tend to use that most
There's
of the
a company in England that is working on that.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
obviously that's what protects us is a magnetosphere,
No.
And then the third one, which is very interesting, which is kind of where I'm at the moment with a lot of stuff I'm looking at, is this idea that you're talking about, is that how can we re-engineer the human body to better cope with space? So, you're coming at it from both sides. You're saying we'll re-engineer the actual physical infrastructure required to get from A to B in space, and then we're going to re-engineer the human to be able to cope with these sort of stresses.
Pat Cadigan explores that in The Girl Who Went Out for Sushi, which is a fascinating story. If you've not read it, it was featured in the late Gardner Dozois's sort of best of science fiction. I think it was 2015. And it basically is human beings who are bioengineered into these kind of sort of, I don't know, sort of
and the
very
the real
thin
scary
fabric things.
Yeah, the real scary thing about it is that it is possible. This is like, the more I kind of read into it, I'm reading a fascinating book at the moment, Next 500 Years, How We Engineer Human Beings for Space. Right. And it is fascinating to just understand how far we've come in terms of genetic engineering. So what they're basically saying is they take something like the study with the fish, and they say, what is it within the genetics of this that makes it do that and can survive, and can we adapt the human genome to express those genes? And
I think there'd be a lot of resistance and pushback against something like that.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't do it. That's for sure.
It's not just that you wouldn't do it, but I think that there's going to be a lot of pushback to doing it to anybody.
Mars, but not if I have to turn into something else. That'd be one of those strange people at the bar in Star Wars, with the 3 eyes.
Well, I remember reading a very similar book back in the 90s, and that's exactly what they were talking about, is how do we re-engineer humanity to survive in space, on other planets, on the deep ocean, and it was, I remember it was a very fascinating read. But again, I mean, you are going to have a serious pushback, not just from individuals, but from governments, from people,
scientific organizations.
From scientific organizations. I mean, look at the whole thing of, my son showed me some article the other day that China's talking about making hybrid people.
Chimera.
Chimera, making chimeras. And it's just like every other country in the world is like, wait, what? You want to do what? That's crazy,
Well, you see, the problem with us humans is, once we know we can, it's very hard to stop us from doing it, and that's been our history. And that's what makes a great sci-fi, because you can take that sort of a story and you can extrapolate it out into a situation.
There's been a lot of stories about people creating Supermen or genetically engineered, that wind up going to war with the regular people.
But it is often
a great trope.
And I think we can kind of see that this is a gradually evolving thing. It is often that some of those tropes are explored based on the current cultural consciousness of the ideas that people have, as in how it would happen. And then gradually, as our technology, our real technology steps forward, we see those tropes, or the stories of those tropes, gradually turn into fantasy. Radioactive spiders are no longer the source of superpowers. Maybe they still are. I'm sorry if I've Santa Claus isn't real, and the Tooth Fairy doesn't come and take your teeth and give you money. Let's just get all of those out there. If anybody is struggling. But yeah, the point being is actually this kind of technological threshold. This goes back to SJ's point, really. The technological threshold in the reader. The reader's general idea of what kind of things are, how it works, whether you can hear sound in space, whether you can fly, whether you can't fly. All of the things of how those things work. Gradually our reader, well, the general consciousness, because I count myself as a reader too, is gradually advancing. And of course, that means that if you are exploring the trope, you've got to be all that more subtle.
Yeah,
so how would we get, going back to realistic ship design, and now that I've got all you brilliant minds in front of me, I could pick your brain. So how would we get to interstellar travel? So what I'm talking about is, I kind of can see how we can do interplanetary within the solar system. Okay, we're there, I think, pretty much. Okay,
close, yeah.
We're close enough, yeah. But to do interstellar, so to Alpha Centauri,
you're going to be pushing past the projection, the realistic projection of current technology there. It would have to be some
ship. What sort of a ship would we need for
that? There's a lot of designs that work on current physics, but we wouldn't know how to build them practically in any kind of engineering way, like the laser light sail that you can, or microwave sail that you could build. That's something like that.
Starship light shot or whatever.
But again, you are limited by the speed of light. So even
you're
if
also
you come
limited
up
by
with
fuel.
And
well, that's why the microwave or laser sail, you're not because the fuel's back at home.
Well, and the expectation would be either you touch
would that be
stasis or generation ship.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is, what propulsion mechanism is there either currently existing or theoretical that could get us to interstellar space? So that's 4.5 light years. So
you're talking
what timeline? What
I was going to say, how fast?
Are you willing
could be, as you say, it could be generational.
Well, there was another thing I read a few years ago, and I'm totally happy to be debunked here. So please do debunk me and make me sad. There was another thing I read a few years ago about microchips, as in essentially reducing down what you're sending to a molecular level, and then firing that out in the direction that you want to send it in.
You could
talking about
just say I'm going to send a photon to.
Well, essentially, but if you're able to encode the necessary instructions to remake the things that you want to be remade,
talking about like a nanotechnological factory of some kind. Yeah, I've heard, those are there's something called a something probe. I can't remember the name of it, but the idea was that you would send small packages with nanotechnological factories in them that you could send them out, and they would get to another system, and they would use the resources there to build more of them. Von Neumann probes. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And actually I think John Ringo wrote it, and John Ringo and Travis Taylor wrote a series about alien von Neumann probes trying to remake Earth. But
that's not too different from the proto-molecule from The Expanse as well.
Yeah.
It's a similar concept where you launch a probe that gets into the area and uses the mass or biomass or whatever is there to build more of itself and build, in the case of The Expanse, a gateway, in the case of a von Neumann probe, to build the scientific instrumentation and the devices necessary to do the exploration.
I wrote a book.
How do we get there? How do we humans? How do we colonize, say?
Well, I wrote a book where they sent one of these von Neumann probes, except they sent genetic material and the places to clone humans and animals and plants, and it wasn't realistic because they basically terraform the planets and the systems they come to, but which would may or may not be possible, but you could, I guess, if you had the telescopes and the to find a planet that could support life, I guess you could clone humans and raise them with artificial intelligence. And
your issue is time, isn't it? Really, and what you're and in all of these instances, because when we talk about generation ships, you're not talking about us being able to travel in through to somewhere else. We have to accept that removal. So whether it's our descendants, whether it's actually the organic, the blueprint of who we are, or whether it's something else, something that essentially says, well, just bacteria or something else.
There is one other possibility. One thing people ignore in a lot of popular fiction is how much faster biological sciences are going to progress than, like, for instance, just to give something that I always think of, Star Trek: The Next Generation. We're going to cure male pattern baldness long before we go faster than light. So if we can lengthen the human lifespan and we can get people to hibernate, as Lisa was talking about earlier, if we're going to live like 400 years, maybe we won't mind spending 40 of them, in hibernation on the way to another planet.
So the tech I'm playing with at the moment, I have so all my series based around, for the most part, what is technically possible, or at least theoretically possible. So it's all solar system based. So now I'm moving them a bit, not unlike the Expanse. I have this thing where I want to move them beyond that. So I'm looking at what sort of technology and realistic ship designs. And I'm talking about realistic. What do we have, even if it's theoretical, that we could use as a propulsion system to get us to Alpha Centauri in 10 years type of thing, or 15 years. So I've been playing around with antimatter. Seems like a suitable.
I've heard that there's a problem with keeping the antimatter existent for the trip, that you'd have to have some way of making it en route.
Yeah, the percentage of antimatter to matter is just.
What's interesting about antimatter is that there's an awful lot of it. Okay, it's just not an awful lot of it around in Earth, but you do find it in the where do you find it in the Kuiper belt, Van Halen belt? You find it in. So, I mean, again, I'm pushing the limits. This is science fiction, okay? But the theory is true in a sense that you could use an antimatter drive that could approach maybe 50 to 60% the speed of light. But again, you have the second problem, which is this: is it a generational ship, or are you extending the life of the people that are on it?
Well, you could get to Alpha Centauri in the life of you could
a
small portion of the life
easy.
Of the person.
Easy. Well, not quite easy, but
I mean, by the time that we get the engineering to make something like that, we will know exactly what is in orbit around Alpha Centauri. We'll have telescopes in space that will be able to see the planets in orbit around those stars, and we'll know if it's worth going there or not.
See, one of the big restrictions I think we have at the moment, just currently in terms of ship design, is that we have to build the ship on Earth and then send it up there.
Yeah, that's not going to be for much longer.
No.
I mean, once we have the ability to build something up there, then it becomes vast. It's a quantum leap, I think, in terms of ship design.
It's interesting. It's interesting that the reader's consciousness of that is going to, is something that they are going to have to. I mean, some obviously understand that immediately. I mean, we're talking about it. But the restrictions of gravity are huge, and we certainly still see science fiction that is respondent to those restrictions of gravity. We still see science fiction, popular science fiction, where I'm going, Star Wars, that is essentially still thinking about the way acceleration works and the way in which velocity works. without this idea of there being a vacuum or there being no gravity to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, why does an X-wing have a wing? That's a good question.
But so here's the thing about
to hold those four lasers.
You
why do they open out? I mean, what does that do?
Thermal dumps.
Gravity, but
it allows them to focus the lasers on the same point. Yes, I am.
Totally.
No. I made this up when I was about 13 years old, when I was watching Star Wars, and trying to come up with good reasons why they look like that.
And somebody else
opening
made
up
it.
as thermal radiators.
Somebody else
there were
made
thermal
it up.
radiators on the inside panels that they were opening up. So
yeah, somebody else made it up and wrote a technical manual and got paid for it.
Exactly,
and well done. Well done to that person. That's the point.
So, but you touch on the one point about gravity, and that's the whole other part of the science aspect of this. If and when we ever learn to manipulate gravitational waves to be able to not only go gravity, anti-gravity, but to generate it as a pushing force or a pulling force, you're now in a whole nother category of physical propulsion. I mean, that was what I did in my book to solve my problems around interstellar travel, was a race that was in tune with gravity as a, like, we see water and whatever, they see the essence of gravitational forces and have the ability to not only generate anti-gravity for solar interplanetary travel, but they had an entirely different set of gravitational engines, if you will, that would only work outside of the stellar influences of the sun. So once you got beyond the edge of the solar system, where those influences were so weak, you had the ability to generate these forces that were so, encapsulating and propulsion, whatever. But that's how I solved my problem of going between the stars. But the whole point being is that on Earth, your problem of building in space isn't the ability to push things there, is if we could float them there.
Well, there's a whole lot more than just gravity that, or the absence of gravity that comes into play when we talk about construction in space. And you guys, you engineer types are better at this than I am. But I mean, just the fact that there's no atmosphere and there's no oxidation is going to make things much simpler. Mining.
The bizarre thing, of course, in space is that you can build a ship of any shape you want. I mean, it can be, coronavirus shaped for all, and it's just going to fly. It doesn't have to be pointy. Right. It doesn't have to look like the only reason.
It doesn't have to be aerodynamic, and that's
until you get to a good portion of the speed of light, when you start getting bits of interstellar debris hitting it, and then you're going to have something that doesn't.
Yeah. It's interesting in Passengers. You remember the film Passengers?
Yes.
So they had this kind of
really
shield.
weirdly designed ship.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I thought.
Yeah, it was
gorgeous.
And if you're going, if you plotted your course and you're going in one direction, then there is I suppose a kind of design principle to say propulsion at this end, and then when I need to slow down, either flip it round or propulsion at that end as well, and then we can we can kind of maybe put the fuel in the middle. I don't know.
A lot of that depends on the purpose of your ship, because an exploration ship or a scientific ship or anything like that, or industrial,
going to be
you can build it however you want. Yeah. But like I write military science fiction, and when you have a military ship, then you have to be able to focus weapons out of the end opposite of your drive, or out of the way the drive's going, because you can't fire a beam weapon through your fusion drive. So,
but your fusion drive is a weapon.
Well,
it is. It really is.
Close enough to you.
I mean, all of us at that very moment, all of us were thinking, no, there's probably a way of doing that.
Rick's right. If you've got a weapon that's going to fire right through your engine plume, it's going to be dispersed and ruined.
A fusion drive would only be a weapon if it was like some kind of a photon drive, because otherwise there's no atmosphere to carry the shock wave of the fusion. So the plasma is going to disperse almost immediately. You'd have to be shooting like light out of the back of your ship in order to.
The other thing
The whole basic
is,
concept of engine is you apply heat to a source of fuel and you create thrust. Stuff shoots out the back end. And what that stuff is that shoots out the back end is, based
anything.
upon, it could be water. I mean, it could be,
Yeah, I mean, that's been explored.
Xenon.
Yeah.
It could be anything.
I mean, that's not
it's not
practical. It's not
constant.
going to be water, but
It could be microwaves if it's an EM drive.
Well, once you're in space, it's not constant anyway. I mean, you're doing it to make a change. Once you establish motion, that motion is going to be consistent until you get an outside influence or you want to make a change. So, if you're shooting along and you want to fire, through your engines, but it shouldn't be running anyway. Yeah, exactly. But the point I was going to say
unless you're like decelerating into an orbit and the enemy's coming up, then you might. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing I've tried to sort of figure out in my mind in designing ships is the use of ballistic weapons within a ship. Okay.
Oh,
I wrote
ballistic weapons and
fighting
small
inside the ship.
pressurized containers don't really work terribly well.
Well, honestly, with the shielding you'd have to have for radiation, I don't think a ballistic weapon's going to go. That you fire for like a pistol is not going to go through your.
Yeah, there are some that are slow firing enough to where they could hurt human flesh and they won't hurt a bulkhead.
Yeah, I've used sort of low power gas velocity weapons at different times because of specifically that the idea of kind of trying to have anti-personnel weapons that are designed that they won't go through walls. But then of course people wear more armor, don't they? They wear the wall as an armor, and
but
then
we were just talking about radiation shielding, and you're going to have. I mean, assuming you don't have some sort of magnetic shielding like you were saying before, your hull's going to be pretty thick. I don't think like a rifle round's going to go through that.
What's going to be even more interesting is calculating where the thing's rotating.
Ballistic weapons, the evolution of ballistic weapons within a space environment. So they will have to have evolved to that point. I mean, ballistic weapons evolved on Earth, but in space, in my mind, that would probably evolve a different type of weapon for internal spaceship conflicts.
All sorts of weapons. So, I mean,
you could have gyrojet type of rocket rounds that wouldn't have any recoil, and you could have them variable thrust. So they, if you're worried about shooting through the wall, you just set it for lower thrust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if you're firing something with 1,000 rounds a minute, that's not really.
Well,
that's not really going to help you.
I don't think you'd be shooting that inside of a ship, though.
But I have railguns in my story, and one of the things I had to do immediately was to install inertial dampeners, because to your point, if you're shooting 1,000 rounds a minute, you just invented a drive for the ship because it's going to be pushing you right along.
Well, it is, but you'd probably have to fire your main drive in opposition to it to keep that from happening. But I mean. I don't know how you could do 1,000 rounds per minute railgun. That would take a lot of energy
to accommodate ballistic weapons fire in the future.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Well, I mean, it's like Rick said too. I mean, even if you brought a traditional firearm on board a ship, okay, traditional firearm will work in pure vacuum. It's got its opportunity. It's a functional weapon no matter where you take it. How long it's functional, that's varying. But if you are traveling on some kind of interstellar ship, and we're not talking here your basic NASA probe ship for exploring the solar system, that hull's going to be thick. And it's not just going to be one hull. You're going to have an inner hull. You're going to have an outer hull. You're probably going to have a hull on top of that that's got a Whipple shield, so that if you get hit by interstellar media, it gets dispersed and it doesn't breach even the outer hull.
Either that or you have one heck of a calculator in front.
So what you're basically saying that those sort of ships would have to be designed to accommodate meteorites, micrometeorite hits.
Any kind of ship that's going to spend a lot of time out in space.
Vastly faster than a ballistic weapon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But as far as non-ballistic weapons go, I mean, you know, we're already experimenting with like ultra short pulse weapons that use pulse laser-induced plasma
they're
to
the
either
ones
paralyze
I tend to go
or
for.
yeah.
So,
on bows and
I hate to
arrows, I
cut
use
this
them
off.
as well. They're fairly effective.
Knives.
We're down to the last 5 minutes.
Knives.
Yeah. We're down to the last 5 minutes. Well, I'm going to have Kevlar in my suit, so I'm going to.
Yeah, you're okay.
I want to give everybody an opportunity for a last comments. Gerald, do you want to start?
Oh God. Well, I don't know. I hope you all enjoyed listening to us yarning away about spaceship design, and see us in the next session.
Where can we find you? Yeah.
Oh, you can find me geraldmkilby.com. Go there, you'll find everything.
Alan?
I think I'll just start by saying a book recommendation, something that I was hoping we'd get to, but we veered a little bit away.
It's one of my books, Alan.
No. There's a brilliant physics book called What Shape is Space? If you don't know about it, it basically has lots of sections in it that are big text and then smaller text and smaller text and smaller text. And so it means it's really accessible to whatever reader. So being a bad scientist, the big text is great for me. And I think it's fabulous. But you can find me at alanstroud.com. And I obviously, this has been an absolute education for me. So thank you, everybody.
I do want you to post your reading list at some point. Lisa?
Sure. You can find me at biogenesiswar.com or on any of the social media platforms, Facebook /LL Richmond. And this has been a blast.
Rick?
You can find me at rickpartlow.com or facebook.com/Duty Honor Planet. And on Amazon, I'm pretty much the only Rick Partlow who writes science fiction. So, and thanks for having this non-math major on your show.
SJ.
SJ Shower, you can find me on spiralwar.com, undergoing revision soon, and on all the socials. The Spiral War series will be relaunching this fall, and I hope to hear and see you all again soon.
And this is Charlie C.W. Lamb. You can find me at cw-lamb.com. If you look up Charles Lamb, you're going to end up with an 18th century English author, and he never did any science fiction.
It's not you.
It's not me. I did a little family research. I find out I'm not even related.
I know. English people know all the English people. It's not you. We all know each other.
That's a small island, right? Well, I got to tell everybody, had a really wonderful time. A great group of speakers, and I think we could have gone on for another hour.
Easily. Yeah, we still haven't got to airlocks yet.
Yeah.
I know. Or food. Or air supply,
and you can imagine, we put a load of science fiction authors in a room, and they all kind of heatedly discuss the ways in which we can interpret science. If we put 6 really, really, really sort of top-end Nobel Prize winning scientists in a room, you can imagine the conversation would have been even worse.
I wouldn't have been able to understand it.
The ad hominems would have been all over the place.
But food, Lisa, algae and soy.
Yeah, Soylent.
Yeah.
I will say I saw something the other day about companies starting to want to tap science fiction and fantasy writers to come in. Yes.
It's loads of money.
The UK Ministry of Defence has done that. There is a scheme.
So is the United States.
I thought I read something that the French were doing that for developing new weapon systems and counters to them. So
scenario based.
It's not a new. I mean, Neil Stephenson, I think, was kind of employed as a futurist.
Catherine Acero has been on a panel for the Defense Department as well.
I mean, he was a futurist with Blue Origin, so.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, Hyrus, we're great. We're amazing. I mean, really, we know what's going down the track. We can sort you out.
It's another revenue stream.
Time to cycle through the airlock, guys.
Okay.
All right, I think we're done, guys. James, it's on to you.
Okay.